when I realized how fascinating this technology has become. I just couldn't, contain myself anymore, but not to throw myself into this. And suddenly, allows you to take certain knowledge and certain skills onto a new level. And I really feel that this is what this technology is going to do for us.
On this episode of the Colorist podcast, I talk with color scientist and trainer Dado Valentic. Recently, Dado's presentation about artificial intelligence and color grading has been making its way through the internet. In this YouTube video, he poses a question: can we make a colorist's job easier by using machine learning to match shots? This is the basis for a new plugin he is developing for DaVinci Resolve called Joy. Originally from Yugoslavia, Dado's career has spanned from working at corporations like Apple and Sony to running his own post-production facility, MyTherapy. There, he worked on a massive amount of projects in TV, film, and commercials. In addition, he is a trainer for the International Colorist Academy and Training. Currently, he has decided to put his full focus on developing new software with his latest company, Colourlab. In this podcast, we talk about machine learning and how it relates to color grading, working with HDR in a color-managed workflow, being involved early in the filmmaking process, and how teaching has increased his skills as a colorist. And now, here's Dado Valentic. Thanks, Dado, for joining me on the podcast.
No, thank you, Josh. It's my pleasure. It's actually my honor because I have been listening to your podcast for quite a long time. I loved every guest you had on it. So it's actually an extreme honor for me to be featured in your podcast. So thank you for that.
Oh, thanks a lot. So I did a little research on you before we did the podcast, and I understand that you have a background at Apple, that you were an engineer originally at Apple. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Actually, I was there for not very long time, maybe just a year or so. And it happened when Steve Jobs took Apple over again. And then he basically came to the UK and closed all European offices of Apple and just kept the British office running. I believe that they had to change their staff completely around. And it was just at the time when I finished an MBA. And I got approached by an agency to see whether I would be interested in working for Apple. And, I was a big Apple fan already at that time, even though I was more a fan of Steve Wozniak back then. So I thought, okay, let's go. But I had the honor to meet Steve Jobs because he came over to give us a pep talk. And he gave the best pep talk ever. He said, the product you're going to try to support is an absolute shit. And I was like, and I was like, oh my God, that was before OS 10, it was like the OS 8 or something like that. So, it was a very interesting time. I was actually there and when the company was just changing and, coming out of nowhere again, and so to say. But I stayed there for not very long time. I moved on to Sony. And then after that, I've given up completely on big corporate. I decided it's better for me to work maybe in a small company environment and find it a little bit more exciting than just work for really big, large corporate companies.
So how did you end up getting into color grading?
I really wanted to get into it for many years. Actually, before I worked at Apple, I was like a DJ, and I still love DJing. I do this as a kind of my fun still. And I had this song that I released that got licensed for a commercial of a Bacardi. And then they asked me to make a 30-second version of that song. So I went to the post-production facility to deliver and to see what it's going to look like. And in that process, I saw color grading facility for the first time. And it was just this incredible place with 3 gorgeous girls sitting in front and massive Chesterfield sofa and this really arrogant guy. I don't want to say whose name it is, but there was this kind of top colorist who when I asked him, hey, how do you become a colorist? He kind of looked down on me like, who are you with an accent like that to even wonder that you could do a job like this? They were at that time, Colorist was driving really fast cars and had a bank account in Switzerland. It was just a really, really different time. So maybe because of that, maybe because it felt you can't do this, I, got this kind of desire to do it, right? And then, once I kind of, after a few years later, I learned a lot about, color grading, just maybe from as an outsider. And then, I just braved myself into the world of color grading. I went to LA. I did a course on how to operate DaVinci Resolve. and then came back to London and, remortgaged my house and started my first color grading facility. That was 12 years ago. And the reason why I called it MyTherapy, because it was that, it was like MyTherapy. But I think, because of that name, I ended up always having the strangest jobs. I think, people kind of would see, if companies called MyTherapy, that's probably what I need right now. I'm going to go there. So for the past 12 years, I end up working on some craziest jobs and, really, really adventurous time.
Yeah. And, running a facility takes a completely different skill set than actually being a colorist and working with clients. It's a different interaction with clients. How do you balance those two things?
I'm actually really bad at this whole kind of business side. I have to say, I'm a kind of I love color grading. I love doing that. And this is what I was doing. So for the past few years, it was my wife, Ivana, that was looking after the business side of the kind of company. And that kind of finally helped me to get a little bit better in the whole business side. To be honest, I have decided to close the operation in London as a post-production and then focus completely on development of software because I just could not manage both. I love to be colorist and sit and grade, but, the day-to-day running of the post facility and, servicing really big clients that I was working with for the past few years because I was based at Warner Brothers in London and, we were just doing we were doing jobs that needed a full attention. I just really did not think that, I will be doing the right thing to try to do both at the same time. I believe if you want to do something right, you got to focus on that. I've been developing software for on the side for the past 2.5, 3 years or so. And now I thought, okay, with the discovery of what we can do and all of this, I said, this is now a moment for me to focus on this full time.
Right. And I think that that's what most people have noticed about you recently is your presentation on AI and machine learning to color grading, which a lot of people saw on YouTube. The presentation was great. It was really fascinating and really exciting. To listeners who haven't seen it yet, I really highly encourage that you check it out. So give us a brief overview of what this is and how people will be using it.
Thank you, by the way, for that. That spirit of this is something amazing is exactly what I felt when I started playing with it, And I have to say, I didn't have a clue what machine learning is or AI. I honestly didn't even think that this is something that, it exists. In reality, I thought it's some kind of, stuff that scientists use. I was working on a project that was using a lot of cloud processing. And with that, I got close to some engineers that were working in AI and machine learning. And then I ended up in conversations with them. And then I even hired one of the top AI and machine learning developers to work for me on a project. And then with him in a spare time, we were doing some experimentations. And when I realized how fascinating this technology has become, I just couldn't, contain myself anymore, but not to throw myself into this. And, I think last time I felt like that was when I discovered a sampler. When I was a kid, I was like a musician and I was playing instrument, and then a sampler became a reality that you could buy after saving for it for a few months, and it was only like maybe 8-second sampling without a RAM upgrade, but it was a sampler that you could trigger via MIDI and you could make your kind of house tunes and electronic music tunes with it. And it was just amazing, you could suddenly make music with it. And this kind of AI is exactly that. And suddenly, allows you to take certain knowledge and certain skills onto a new level. And I really feel that this is what this technology is going to do for us. So what we basically decided to do is something very interesting. We basically want to develop a tool that will help colorists in his or her job. Basically, I think the concept of machine learning as a very intelligent system that can color grade is far from reality. We don't really have computers that can think creatively. That doesn't exist. Creativity is based in the human hands still, or mind, or whatever you want to call it. What we developed already is the prototype of an assistant, basically. For example, I already work like that on many projects. What I would do is, let's say if I work on a big TV series, I would come in and I would grade maybe a first episode. And then I would hand over this to other colorists who would then be able to continue working on the remaining episodes by, following my instructions, my, show lot and the way, how the kind of the style sheet I developed and the kind of node tree and so on. And also, I've trained many fantastic colorists that came through MyTherapy, exactly like that. I would then basically work on a movie. I would do like a main scene, the main shots in the scene, and my assistant would then get the responsibility to match for the rest of the scene and so become really good at it. Some of them have great colorist careers, but that was the way how they trained. They literally were assisting me in finishing the movies. So I thought, okay, if there is a way that I could get machine to do these things as well, I think that would be absolutely fantastic because, it would just mean that, we would get, this help, somebody who could basically be able to do this for us. So we embarked on the kind of way to create, some sort of system. I named it Joy, because I thought it's going to be an absolute joy if we have something like this. Okay, this is a good thing. Let's go for that. There is this spirit around Joy that we're kind of developing at the moment like that. So what Joy does is this. So basically, the first thing we had to develop is a system that will recognize what is in shot. You see, because you cannot match unless you understand the shots. If you have a medium and wide, you need to know, hey, I have for example, skin here or face here, sky here, and so on. So you kind of need to know what you're really matching. So first we used that. So we used and we trained it, and we used some already existing algorithms to start recognizing what is in the shot. The second thing we had to do is we had to understand how things are moving inside the shot. The biggest problem with any auto matching so far was that it was only analyzing a single frame. So you kind of, this match this frame, but actually no shot is a single frame. It's a series of frames. There is a whole motion. There's, a shot happens. So we need to understand the motion vectors of how the shot is moving, how is it progressing. Okay, once we had that, then we basically were able to isolate elements of the shot that we would be matching. But what was very important and what separates machine learning from just algorithms is that machine learning is capable of being trained. Okay, so what that means is this. If you get basically machine learning to suggest a look for you, you can accept it, but you can also correct it. And if you correct it, machine learning will understand what you corrected. And based on that, will try to improve so further on. So actually, it's possible to kind of train a model that will be better in guessing how you want to apply primary color correction to certain shots by following you as a colorist, how you work. And it is very individual and it is very project-based. So, for example, a model that works on a particular job is completely going to be useless on another because you kind of apply always the slightly different styles of grading, So you need to retrain model for another job.
So basically, part of the whole workflow will be this training session.
That is the secret. You see, if you take any AI model and you just close it and you just let it run, it can only do very narrow thing, right? And that's not useful to us. We wanted to have an assistant that will adapt to what we do. Now, here is the problem. If we tried to do this, let's say, even 2 years ago, that training process would have been almost impossible because, the hardware for AI and machine learning was so expensive, and it was very, big and large, and it was just really, really hard even to get access to it. Today, you can even get a single graphic card that you can put in your computer that will do that processing 20 times faster than 2 years ago. And that is incredible breakthrough in speed that we started getting thanks to NVIDIA, and they are just amazing what they're doing. It's absolutely amazing. So what we then said is, okay, fine, now that we can train model so quickly, we process it in much faster way, we can then really implement a live learning. They call it passive learning. And that's kind of how we are developing it further. The second biggest problem I said to my developers I work with, I said, look, it's great that we have this, AI, but it's completely useless to me if it's not inside the grading system that I use. I do not want to have a separate application for this. I already work with DaVinci or with Baselight or whatever, and I don't want to have now another grading system just to do this. It has to work inside, otherwise it's useless. Which was the reason why I ended up for the past year developing DaVinci plugins, because that way we were learning how we can integrate external processing into DaVinci Resolve. So Joy is actually going to be a plugin for DaVinci. It's not going to be an external application. So that was basically kind of the process of development so far.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm not sure, I'm not an OFX developer, or I don't pretend to know any of that stuff, but one thing that several color grading applications do struggle with is effectively rippling those grades through to other shots. And the machine learning, in order to work correctly, it's got to be aware of the shot that it's on and how to set it forward into all the other shots. So how does Joy deal with that?
Basically, what you have to do is you have to let it analyze all of the material first, basically. So it has to basically process all of the material. And then it marks all the time codes and all the kind of, basically parts of the timeline. And then it gives you for every shot 4 suggestions. One suggestion is the one that Joy thinks it should be your favorite, and 3 are variations. So what you then do is you then go and review the suggestions. You can just accept the one that is being offered to you as a main one, or you could switch to alternative, or you could just click on one of them and then correct them, basically. So this is how you do it. You kind of just go. So at the moment, what we use it for mainly when we are training is to use it for dailies grading, because dailies, are such a process. I feel sorry for my guys that have to come in at 11 with a can of Red Bull and sit through day after day after day. You understand, And I really want them to move on to start doing some funky stuff and some commercials and not have to depend, that from dailies grading. I mean, it's not a sexy job at all. It's great that you can put on your CV that you worked on a, Game of Thrones or whatever, big movie or whatever. But it's actually, life-threatening, because, you develop this, really bad habit and dependency on Red Bull or other caffeinated drinks in order to survive the night, and I don't want them to do this. So I'd rather have basically them spend an hour, just going through all of the rushes with Joy, and just selecting the right shots and pressing the button and sending it off to the render farm and going home. And that is really what we are trying to do at the moment. So, what happens literally, we load all the rushes or a reel, and then, Joy already, gives you all the suggestions, you do this, and then you work. And this is scenario we want to come to. At the moment, we're still not there. We're still here. We have a lot of work to do. I don't want to go into detail. There is actually a lot of things we need to put in place before it really becomes useful, because, at the moment you need to have constantly an engineer involved in order for this process to really function. And we are not really deploying it for real. What we're doing at the moment is we are doing jobs, and in parallel, we're using Joy to kind of see how it performs. And then based on that, we are training it and learning on mistakes, developing algorithm further, and so on and so on. So I think that, we're going to need at least another year before we are completely ready with it.
What's really interesting too is you figure that other companies can patent their own Company 3 machine learning algorithm, or Digital Domain can make their own style too, and, set that apart from somebody else. So it's really interesting that, everybody will just basically be trainers for this stuff too.
Yeah. And you know what? I think if I could, put myself forward to train one algorithm is to do one with Roger Deakins. I think this would be my kind of favorite. Can I please train Joy on a Roger Deakins movie, and I'll pay any money for that. I just kind of would like to do that. So anyway, I mean, one thing that is really interesting about AI at the moment, it is very open community, right? There is still beautiful sense of sharing in it. The post-production, always had this kind of veil of mysticism and magic and dust around it and secrecy, how you do things and all of that, trying to kind of, separate one company from another by having some secret sauce or something like that. You see, AI at the moment is nothing like that, right? Scientists and developers openly share what they do, and they are very much, Google, gives you access to much of subject, and then also, like, to be honest, many people who really understand this technology, they say that they don't understand how they get these results. It is really interesting. Sometimes you kind of send AI to process something and you get a result back, and no one can really explain how these results happen. It's very so it is maybe because of that, there is this kind of sense of sharing, and we are just part of that community. It's just that we're doing something which is unusual. Most other people are using it for big data and, analyzing whatever, people do in the social media, whatever they're doing. We are just the only kind of little, specific, group of developers that is concerned how to make it work in post-production.
I don't know if you ever do this, but this happens to me sometimes. I will actually apply the wrong grade to something and go, that's interesting, and it's totally on accident, but that's really what the AI is doing too, is giving you 4 options to just go, I didn't really think about doing something like that. So that's what's kind of exciting about it, is it's making you a better colorist by giving you different things to think about.
Exactly. And this is exactly my thinking, exactly that point where you say sometimes you press a wrong memory button and you go like, oh, inspiration for me was really Spotify playlist, which is called Discover Weekly. I was this kind of avid vinyl collector, and, I was always going to particular record shops in Soho and had my suppliers for my tunes I liked and all of that. And then I kind of said, oh, Spotify is just for people who are lazy. Why would I want to have it? And then, whether I want or not, I discovered this Discover Weekly. And you know what? It changed my life. I mean, I discovered this beautiful music and artists that I never heard of before. And it was so good. I actually can't wait to come to work on Monday morning to switch on the new Discover Weekly playlist. And everybody in the office has to listen to it, and we're all voting if we're going to, keep the song or not. And it's just really exciting. And it's so good, to have somebody who really guesses what you would like and gives you like a playlist of 30 songs, that you could think like you would like or not. And in process of that, discover incredible new artists that, you wouldn't have a chance to discover before in any other way. And that was the inspiration. That was, I said, if I could get something like this to give me suggestions for the looks that I never thought of, something I could discover, because, you kind of, have a little creative block effectively, If you want to look at every colorist, I could look at the movie and I could say who graded it, because colorists develop their style that they kind of stick to, and clients book them because they have a particular style of grading, and they become these kind of one-trick ponies, that are constantly doing movie after movie the look that is their signature look, which is great. It works from business perspective, it works from director's perspective because they know what they're going to get when they book it in, but it doesn't necessarily work from the artistic perspective, because you just become a guy who's turning around same thing over and over again. So think about it. Now you get somebody who could suggest you, hey, how about this? Oh my God, and that opens a new world, and that makes the job so much more exciting and interesting again.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of new technologies like the machine learning that you're doing, but another one that is constantly in the colorist's peripheral vision is HDR, which I know you've done a lot of work with too. And one of the first shows to explore HDR was Marco Polo, which you had an opportunity to work on. You championed the idea that HDR and color managed workflows have to work hand in hand to be effective. So how do your grades change when you do an HDR grade, and specifically as the primary grade as your HDR grade?
So actually, interesting, this Marco Polo, I think, happened again because the company I was running was called MyTherapy, And I think, you had to be extremely brave to accept Marco Polo Season 2 back then. No one ever did a HDR before. No one ever did it. I mean, some people did it as a test. And I was participating in some of those tests because my office was very close to Dolby. And, I have a very close relationship with them. So, I had access to very, very early prototype Dolby Vision systems. And maybe because of that, I kind of, when I got approached, I said, I'm going to do it, not really even knowing what I'm going to get involved with. So what happened was number one thing, and why I said, why is color management important? Monitoring HDR on set is an absolute illusion, right? We could potentially get 30,000 pounds monitor on set, but in reality, no one would ever look at it, because to see HDR on set, you need to have a tent, really, like some sort of controlled lighting. You need to have a tent. On these shows, you don't really have time to go to the tent. I mean, DP is constantly on set, running take after take after take. And this guy or girl doesn't really have time to kind of go into the tent and watch something in HDR. I mean, what you're talking about, man, this is like, we could maybe after the shoot go and look at some things in HDR, but by then it's already too late, So I realized, we don't want to bother them with HDR that's going to slow them down because they have to walk 100 meters to my van where I had the HDR monitor and stuff like that. It's just not going to work. So I realized what I need to give to the cinematographer is a solution. The look that they made on set, that they know how to make as an SDR look, works in HDR. And that is like almost translation. And then I tried first mathematical translations, like calculating what my nits would be and what, SDR values are and all of that. And that looked absolutely horrible. Then I also spent some time grading HDR material and realizing that I'm behaving completely recklessly to that material because I was excited about the brightness and the colors, and everything looked too bright and too saturated. It looked like, really like a carnival, everything was oh my God. And I realized I forgot about the emotion of the movie, Hey, this is Marco Polo. It is 13th, 14th century. It's what am I doing? You know what I mean? This is not what it's supposed to be. So then what I realized we had to do was following. And actually it's an idea I got from still photographers, And basically what I did was this. I looked at exposures and almost like exposure bands or ranges. So for example, a skin would sit in one level of exposure in SDR, and that would be translated in SDR to a certain level. Like I would work with the cinematographer for him to adjust the SDR image, and I would then compare, where was the skin in SDR and where is the skin in HDR? And then started understanding this aesthetic of how an HDR grade needs to look for it to be pleasing, to be exciting because it's better material, but not to be exaggerated at HDR, to be just, give it enough enhancement, where it should look and how it should look. And so I ended up developing these exposure zones, then created a translation for those exposure zones that pick your SDR grade and put it into HDR. So what happens is you basically kind of, open your sequence, you have all the SDR graded, and then you translate everything into HDR. And that usually puts you, let's say, 95% there. And I don't need to change my primary too much. I don't. I usually work mainly on the windows that I can then, apply to certain parts of the image to apply a little depth or change a little bit, just the kind of the proportions of, exposures between, let's say, very bright, a very dark element or something like that. Literally what I'm able to do is I'm able to run in DaVinci two timelines at the same time. One is SDR and one's HDR. And very quickly I'm able to translate between one to another. And then I developed the ability to see SDR grade on HDR monitor and so on. And then now I put that into a plugin. When I let other people work, when I have other colorists that have to, grade, they were a little bit struggling with my, transforms and CTLs and everything that I was using. So I realized I have to make a plugin where someone can just press the button and make it happen. So I made this plugin called Colourlab HDR that does this translation for you.
That's right. There's a whole Colourlab software that you do in addition to what you're doing with Joy. Is that something that you're going to release at some point too, or?
I will. But you know what? It is already used by almost 400 people. And it's used by a small group of professionals. I really, request anybody interested to submit their professional references. And then I decide, hey, is this somebody really who's, a colorist professional or cinematographer or, anything. I want to basically get people who really understand that this is a tool that can help them. And then basically they join a beta. I have about 200, beta testers, and on top of that, about 400 users. What happens at the moment, I run a training program called Color Managed Workflow with Abel Cine in New York and Los Angeles. And when you finish the training, you get access to all of the plugins. And it's a great way to teach somebody, how to use them as well, not just to kind of, download them and figure out what they do. And that makes a big difference, because it's a tool and you need to know how to use the tool before you kind of can really make it useful. And this is how most people are really, getting access to that. I also cinematographers I work with, they have them and so on. So this is really, I'm getting now more and more pressure to make it available online for people who are not necessarily close to New York or LA and they can't come to these training courses and they're too busy, by coming and spending, 2 days with me training them. So, I think I'm going to have to do this. And now that I'm kind of committed to develop software, I think I have more time and capacity to do this. So watch this space. But by all means, anybody who wants to try them out or is interested, just sign up at colourlab.co and, send me your references. Like every few weeks, we do another round, of people, who have, submitted the applications. We accept new people always. It's a small community and, we're happy always to get creative and interesting colorists or DITs or cinematographers to be part of it.
One interesting thing that you said about HDR grading is, what we're always told in the past was you need to balance all your shots and put a look on top of it. But you make the argument that HDR does not work that way.
No. It's very different, I think with HDR has a certain aesthetic and it's got a space that we haven't occupied before in our visual language. It has a dynamic range that we didn't deal with before. It has a color in places we've never seen color before. And I can't wait for us to start actually treating HDR as a new medium. It's the new medium where a cinematographer can express himself or herself. At the moment, we are translating these SDRs to HDRs. But actually, think about what we could do if we are to treat it as a new medium, as a new way of creating looks we have never seen before and breaking some of these kind of, barriers we have put on ourselves to what aesthetic of a look should be, So it's probably going to take a director as Aronofsky or some crazy guy, who's happy to break the kind of the mold and say, I'm going to do it this or that before we start realizing how things could move and where things could go.
You get involved pretty early in the stages of a film or a project to tell them how it's going to look in the grade. Why do you believe that this is such an essential way to work?
I think this is the way we should have been working from the beginning. It's just that we didn't have the technology to allow us to do so. And I think, honestly, anybody who's ever done a project in this way, that they have basically started with an idea, developed the look before they started shooting, then shoot some test material, then, based on that test material, finalized their look, started shooting with the look constantly being applied in the camera while they're shooting and checking that they're getting what they need to get, Editors working with that look applied, reviews and screenings done with the right look on it, and then grading started with all of those looks being already populated on your timeline. it's like the way when you do it, you would think like, how come we haven't done this? I mean, how, you go like, are you kidding me? This is how collaboration should be. There is no separation between those guys on set and us here in the grading theater. You understand? It's like not that. It's not that, oh, director wants it like this and cinematographer wants it different. And who's gonna win that ego fight? No, you understand? We are working collaboratively and creating a look and the best result for this project. And there is no secrets, there is no like, oh, we'll figure it out once we grade it how it's going to look. No, when we shoot, we know what we're getting. And the dailies already have that look applied. So executives already know what they're going to get. And, everything just works so much better. Effects work better. Grading is shorter and more enjoyable, I get to do stuff that I really should be doing. I can spend time fixing skin, getting, better at tracking, in putting a little bit more detail on by having time to put a few more windows and stuff like that, because I'm not rushed to invent the look and change it 10 times, because we're not quite sure what the look should be. And it's a great way of working.
Yeah, I totally agree. The vision is actually more dialed into what they want it to be from the beginning. And that makes total sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
So aside from all the other work that you're doing, you're also a teacher for ICA, as you mentioned. And there's a great saying that goes, if you want to learn something, read about it. If you want to understand something, write about it. If you want to master something, you teach it. So how has this teaching increased your abilities as a colorist?
Okay, I should think I'm going to actually take a note of that, what you just said. Because normally, like when I was deciding if I should be teaching or not, I was always worried about this thing, oh, those who can't do it, they teach, or something like that. There is that other saying as well. No, look, actually, I was encouraged to teach by my teacher. My teacher told me that if I want to benefit from what he taught me, I need to pass that knowledge in order, like energy, energy never stops. It just goes from one form of energy into another. Knowledge is like energy, if I have a knowledge, I don't have anything from it if I just keep it for myself. But by passing it along, I start to really get benefit from it. That means like I really become a master in that. And then also, I don't teach to people that have to learn something. Every person who has ever come to my class was really interested in color, and they have given up, sometimes their weekends, or time with the family, or their whatever income. They don't want to go and earn money by working on to learn about color because they're passionate about it. And there is nothing better than spending time, in a group with people who are passionate about the same subject as you are. And, like this kind of energy flows. And, I learned so much as well. And everybody shares some of their story experiences. And I always learn, especially with DaVinci developing so quickly, I can't even keep up with all these shortcuts and stuff like this that's happening. So every time someone says, oh, did you know if you pressed shift this and then get, oh my God, I know, So, these are like just the kind of, it's so good. So for me, it's a great pleasure. I really like doing this. And also, I think, that the feedback that I get from people who come through my classes is great. They really like it. And then, what is also incredibly rewarding is like when you see the difference, because sometimes I ask people to send me their showreel before we accept them into the class. And then I ask them to regrade their showreel using the new acquired knowledge. And then when you see the difference before and after, it's so beautiful. And color grading is actually a beautiful art. I think, when you get the technology out of the way, it's a beautiful artistic skill. And it's a very, very rewarding to see people, becoming better in what they love.
So as far as the tools that we use, is there some sort of tool, since you're actually now more on the end of software development, is there another tool that you think that should be developed that hasn't been really explored yet?
Yes, I think, one thing that I'm really, really one thing that keeps me awake at night, I have this problem. I get a little bit, obsessed with an idea, and then it follows me and at the moment I have one, I'm obsessive about something, which is the texture tool. So, I think we're now at the stage where cameras have become so clean and noise-free. I mean, I've been grading, a lot of Panasonic Varicam footage lately. And, this camera runs in 2000 ISO, so clean, so clean. I mean, you get me, you don't have to denoise anything, right? And again, this is a problem now because the texture is such an important part of the visual language. It's like you could do amazing look to an image, but you don't get the right emotion until you don't put, let's say, grain in it, right? And at the moment, grain is simulated in a very flat way. It's like I feel like, when I'm putting layers of grain on top of it and kind of try to it is almost like as if I'm, it is not it. I don't have the control over the texture. I feel like we need to do more. We have better tools for texture. So I have a little plan, I think, but let's keep this watch this space. That's all I can
okay.
say.
There was another colorist actually I believe he was in London as well, Aidan Farrell, and he was known for putting things like candy wrappers in front of the lens of the telecine to give it texture. So some of those ideas are just, the really like almost organic feeling to that stuff is really like what I think is missing too. And it'll be cool to have something like that you can't necessarily do in camera. It's got to be done after it's shot.
Yeah, today especially, like now that we're going to have to start relying more and more on digital tools and post-production tools to give us the results. As much as I love the camera work and as much as cinematographer does an amazing job with lights and choice of optics and lenses and all of that, the importance of what you do with that image afterwards is just, getting bigger and bigger.
Recently, the Colorist Society had started up, a unique society just for colorists. What's your opinion about this, about a group for colorists, and is it time for an award for colorists, and how do you think people would judge that?
I 110% support the CSI. And I think people who have decided to give up, their careers in order to be able to start something like this on our behalf, should be recognized and rewarded for that. And I think this is so good that somebody has got off their back and said, okay, I'm not just going to worry about, my life and my career, but going to do something about the profession in general. And, the fact that we first have a body that is kind of representing colorists is fantastic. Now, this has happened. Now we're now on the next stage. And the next stage is for that body to start working with other industry bodies in helping colorists, get there where we really want to get, And, it is fantastic, that we do those movies, but it's absolutely sad that you have to sit until everybody's left the bloody theater, and even a dog handler and a car driver and every carpenter has, scrolled through, and then somewhere in the bottom you can see who graded it. You understand?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think we deserve a little bit more recognition for what we do. There are some directors that put their colorist in the opening title sequence. Now, I'm not saying that, that everybody should get that position, but I'm just saying that the industry view should change to what role we play in the filmmaking process and how much we contribute to the overall production value. Just try to remove colorist out of the game and see what these movies would look like. Okay, just try to imagine where Marvel movie would be today without, amazing skills of team of colorists that had to work on them in order to, make them look the way they look. And I don't think it's fair that, they are somewhere featured at the bottom of the bottoms, that kind of things. I think, generally, CSI should be doing that for us, And I think this is now where we're at. So let's go. We created this body. We're all in it. Fine. We love it. Let's do the next thing. Let's go and start working with other industry bodies, with the academy, with unions. I don't care, whatever it is. I don't do it, so I don't understand how this whole world works. But, this is hope I have CSI is going to be able to do for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been really great talking to you. It's always awesome to talk to you, Dado. It's your passion and the ideas that you have are just really infectious, and it's always great to talk to you.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you. And now that I'm in LA, I think we should catch up. I know it's very hard that we always spend our life in a dark room, but hopefully, like, we're going to see each other in a daylight, one of these days as well.
Sounds great. So if anybody wants to learn more about your company, about what you're doing, where can they see your work?
At the moment, I think, the best thing to do is to go to colourlab.co, but you have to spell color as a British spelling, So, I'm still, even though I'm now US kind of, orientated, I keep my color spelling. It just sounds like, it looks a little bit sexier for some reason. I don't know why. So basically colourlab.co, and if you're interested in joining, the beta, please, just, log in, just enter your credentials, and we'll be happy to review your application. And then, if you want to learn about, the trainings we do, like that is on color.training, and that is about it. I think this is a kind of, these places, it's a kind of best place, where to discover, what we're doing next and what's going to happen and so on.
That sounds great. Thanks again for joining me.
Thank you, Josh, as well. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and see you soon, hopefully.